So these lightning bolts, right? These are my innovation lightning bolts. I made them earlier today just for you guys. Are you feeling innovative?
That's right.
So welcome. My name is Warner Moore. I've been working in technology in some capacity over 15 years. When I was young, what I liked to do is nerd around with tech. And go figure, back then the cool nerdy tech stuff to do was play around in open source. And at the time, most of information security was open source tools. The internet was young, and people were doing all sorts of neat things. Nessus was open source, Tripwire was open source, Snort was new and fresh, and it was before all these vendors closed source on all these still good applications. My background really, though, is internet technologies, multi-user technologies, ISPs, BBSs before that. I've been working in web operations and security and GRC pretty much my entire career. Well, security early on, 15 years ago, was the cool nerdy thing to do. Pretty much these days, it's all paperwork. So GRC, it seems, is more where I spend my time in InfoSec relative to playing around with tools. And also leader in management. I've built a couple security programs now, a privacy program now as well. I've built a couple high-performing teams. So that's really where my background comes from. I help companies scale their technology and teams. Right now, I work with Cover My Meds. Well, we're a fast-growing company, and before that, 2Checkout. And really, my presentation is going to be broader. It's not necessarily going to deep dive on specific technologies, but I might touch a few. It's really not necessarily the technical track like it is on the agenda. It's more a combination of maybe GRC and executive, 40% GRC, 40% executive, and maybe 20% technical. But I can go into a little more technical stuff if you'd like to. Feel free to consider any questions and bring them up at the end, because the tech is something I'm excited about and more than happy to speak about as well. So I'm curious, of the folks here, still awake, so that's great. Who here works for or with an organization that would consider itself a technology business, or maybe a technology product is the business? Show of hands. So maybe about 5% of front row. So you guys are not the best row. I'm just kidding. You all here are great. But 5% is really what I expect in Columbus at an information security conference. So on the flip side, maybe not the flip side, but a different question. So how many of the folks here just do this technology or this information security thing so the boss wants email? Okay, nobody wants to lay claim to that either. Really, my perspective is going to be more about information security and technology from a technology business perspective. And that's a big part of what I've been going to be talking about as far as practices, techniques, and approaches to information security. So I expect it to be controversial, but fun. So let's talk a little bit about security. This is audience participation time, so I'm putting you all on the spot. You have to participate, at least a little bit. So how do we keep things secure? Just not a paragraph, maybe a few words. Let's name some things. So access control is one way to keep things secure. What are some other ways we keep things secure?
Encryption.
Encryption. That's huge. Firewall? Someone said firewall in this general. Oh, thank you, sir. Well, what are some other things we do, techniques that we use to keep things secure?
Zero trust networks.
Zero trust, yeah. Network, access control, logical or physical network access. Physical security, separation of duties. Anything else?
User education. User education.
User education, that's huge. Okay, two more. Steve?
Authentication.
Thank you, Steve. I knew the voice. One more. Authentication. Anti-malware. That's true. So traditionally, all these things have been our approach to security, and many of them come down to restricting access. And a big control that I think is becoming dated in the industry, and there's better ways we can approach things, is separation of duty. So just maybe for illustration, I won't go into it too deeply, but separation of duty, right? IT, years back, from a professional perspective, pretty much came out of finance for years, and even still in a lot of organizations. IT reports up to the CFO. There's tons of jokes about it. And that's true of a lot of security controls as well. A lot of security controls came out of finance and accounting. And, well, separation of duties, that's huge in accounting, right? If you're issuing checks, you can't accept checks and all that, right? So, traditional security controls, that's a snail crossing the road if you can't make it out down there. I was pretty happy to find this photo, a snail crossing the road. It's a Creative Commons license too. I can't take credit for having gone out and found the right road with the snail hanging out there. That wasn't me. So a lot of these traditional security controls can slow an organization down a little bit, or a lot of it in some cases. So a couple stories, right? The first security program I built, I didn't know what the stuff was. Not from the perspective of having years of experience behind it. I certainly understood, well, we need access control, we need change control, we need all those things. Started really lightweight, because of course you want lightweight processes. And as the organization grew over 10 years later, what these lightweight processes were turned, and I love to tell this story. So the deployment process literally used to be a quick ticket, you fill out the form basically, and somebody deploys something. It literally turned into a pile of paper. This isn't a technology organization. The paper had a list of files changes, hash codes, and then 2 columns for initials. So you had the test engineer, the software engineer initialing multiple pages for this code release. And it gets better. So after initialing all these pages, there's a big block of signatures, so you have to walk around this 100-person organization, get a sign-off from a user acceptance test, a product owner, a test engineering manager, a software engineering manager. So as you might expect in this 100-person organization, and even better, that big pile of paper, it was scanned and then submitted to a ticket, and then somebody else had to pick a 100-person organization. Someone else had to pick up that ticket. It wasn't very quick to get software changes made. And that lasted for a while, but I'm not talking about that organization here. That's really not the crux of my story. The main point here is that these processes grow and kind of build this whole weight of their own over time. Now they provide value. I question the value of turning an organization to a snail, though. I do appreciate the value of creating records of changes, seeing that a change was authorized and being able to go back and tie it to the actual change, maybe even roll back the change. We have a few seats up here for the folks in the doorway. If you're near the end, if you would scoot down a little bit to make it easier for folks to grab a seat, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
I'm getting old, so.
Yeah, I've been standing in the doorway myself half the time this happened. So please, make room, come on in, don't be shy. There's plenty of space in here right up front. An organization being slow, especially for a technology organization where technology is the product, being slow, if you can't respond to market changes, if you can't add features to your product, it doesn't take very long to be irrelevant. So let's speed things up a bit. And really this is where I want to spend the most time with you, talking about ways we can keep things secure, really available and secure. Those are the two things I think of first. How do we keep things available, secure, and scalable too? It's that whole web operations thing. So let's throw separation of duties out the window for tech changes. For the 5% of you who work in technology organizations, you probably know this already. For the other 95% of you, an organization that's full of really smart engineers who has a lot of fun playing with technology, if it takes them weeks to make a simple change, if they have limited influence on the direction of the technology, I can tell you what, those engineers won't be working for you very long. Separation of duties and siloing and all these things that it enables can be addressed through automation tools. That's really the secret here. The secret here is automation. So a lot of the things we want, as information security practitioners, a lot of the things we want to protect, at least me, I don't want 200 engineers to have a login, a root login, or really even a user login to production servers. That has all sorts of challenges that we all know and probably hate. Automation tools can allow us to remove access on the system level and still empower folks without separation of duty and stuff like that. Automation tools can create records. So one of my favorite things to do, as opposed to approval, because that multiple week deployment process with that pile of papers and that 100-person organization, I can tell you what, that block of signatures on the last page, the folks that were signing off had really no understanding of the application or the details of the change, at least not even on a high level as it related to their authorization. They were not empowered to really approve it. They were not in a position to approve it. So peer review, in effect, is a much more effective review and approval process than having a manager or even a senior manager approving routine changes. Let's stop doing that. It doesn't make sense. So no more separation of duties. We have automation tools to enforce our control processes. Nobody has direct access to the system. All changes have to be made through these tools. And at that point, all developers can deploy to production. There's Etsy as one of my favorite technology blogs out there, and the Etsy team is exceptional from an operational perspective. They publish a lot of their code and a lot of the things they do, as well as speak at conferences on their technology blog, Code is Crap. So check it out sometime. There's all sorts of information about some of the ideas I'm talking about. When a new person starts at Etsy, they deploy code. They have one button deploys, it's really easy to do, and anyone can do it. They're not afraid of change. And these practices are becoming more common in technology circles. DevOps is kind of a buzzword right now. Buzzword aside, really what that does is brings together technology practitioners who are driving innovation across industries. So these are the kind of things folks have been adopting. As information security people, we have an opportunity here to bring more to the table from our perspective to enable better security through these automation processes. So, in a little more detail, for systems, we have configuration management. And really, it's not just application deployment, it's system configuration. It's changing infrastructure. All these practices can be applied universally for technology changes. So systems, configuration management, applications, deployment tools, or even continuous integration. Continuous integration is often used for testing, but that can be used as essentially the control. Make sure all the security tests pass before it gets to production. So CI can be just as much as a deployment tool as it can be a testing tool. It's really multifaceted. Code and configuration stored in source code management. We've been doing this a long time in technology. That's nothing new. But the neat thing about source code management, it's a source of record for the change at that point in time. Because if you have a unique identifier that's tied to the automation tool that deploys that change, that ties to the source control, there's your audit trail. And that's way better than a pile of papers by any standard. So ultimately, using a combination of tools, security and availability is built in and auditable, we have a stronger audit trail and more control into it. And the thing is, people aren't talking to auditors about this. A lot of auditors don't have experience working with organizations doing things like this, because it's only more recently where more regulated industry is being, it has found itself in a position where it needs to innovate. And that's really where the auditors spend most of their time. That's where a lot of the GRC folks spend most of the time. The fact that I've been in a payments company and now a healthcare industry company isn't coincidence. So ultimately, using this process, we can have multiple deploys a day. Tens. Amazon has thousands of deploys a day. Etsy, I think they're in the hundreds. I cover my meds. We're averaging, going into 2016, 14 deploys a day. So if we're talking speed, if we're talking value from implementing tools like this, not only is there value from a security perspective, because we have way more control over the production systems and the path to production, there's a lot of value from a business perspective, because we can react to industry changes, business changes, and ultimately have a much more effective product or organization. Even if, as an organization, you are not using technology as a competitive advantage, you will be much more effective operationally, which has a huge value prop in any organization. But my take is, even if you are not a technology organization, that technology can be used as a competitive advantage. And if you are not doing that in your company, in your industry, many years, or even a short, maybe a few years, period of time from now, there's going to be companies in your industry that is. It's going to be challenging for those who haven't caught up. But really, that's a separate presentation. Right now, I'm going to be talking a little more about security. So there's tons of tools out here to enable this. And just to list a few real quick: Capistrano, Deployinator, Jenkins, GitHub, Puppet, Chef, Brakeman, Elk. These all serve different purposes. All automation tools, all can be tied to enable this process. Brakeman, which I'd expect many of you know about, is an automated source code scanner, Ruby-focused tool, really effective tool. All those tools are open source. And if you prefer a vendor, most of them have support and stuff like that. So really, this is a way for information security to align itself and work with more innovative sensors. As an information security practitioner, I most certainly want to be tied to the product, tied to the business, enabling the business to be more effective and more secure, and these are ways to do that. And it's not just systems. We can do this with databases as well. This is a white whale. This is a really difficult thing to do. And it's only more recently where I think I've seen it done nearly perfectly. So system-level access is one thing. Most technology practitioners want system-level access, definitely in infrastructure, most developers. On the database side, many of them would like access to the database as well. And the reason I hear for that most commonly is because we have to troubleshoot production issues. Of course, production issues. There's always an opportunity for process review and improvement. There's always an alternative solution. But there's an automation solution for databases as well. For business process, ultimately it comes down to business intelligence and reporting tools. Tons of tools out there. if there's a business analyst, if there's a business developer, if there's an operations person, if there's a non-technical person in your organization that needs access to the database to make decisions or enable change in the business, a BI tool enables that very well. And that's the way to access the data without accessing the database directly, or reducing the network or physical security controls or logical security controls depending on your environment. That's also a way to abstract access on a data layer. Because if you're doing ETL or extract transform loads and creating data marts and analytics databases, all these things, they certainly shouldn't need to have confidential information. Definitely not credit cards. In almost all cases, not PHI if the processes are totally correct. So that's the business side of things. On the production troubleshooting side of things, the easy, difficult one. I really think this is easy, but every organization I've ever known makes it out to be the biggest challenge ever. And that's scrubbing a database. If you're dealing with terabytes, it's a little more challenging with the logistics of it all. But Moore's Law has been in effect for a long time. There's a technology solution for that. But really just a separate instance, scrub it all. And that's usually the more tricky part. But honestly, a few people who are really dedicated and know the business and product well enough can work out what fields need to be scrubbed out, deleted, or even just clear out entire tables. Right? If the credit card numbers table doesn't need to be empty, I'd sure like to know why. And so that's really the quick win, relatively speaking, a separate instance, development database, automation processes to enable that. But the perfect solution, and I do think the separate instance has value in many environments. Performance testing is one of the better justifications I've heard from a technology perspective to have a full, or at least near full copy of production data. Certainly not with the confidential information, but a tiny database. Tiny database containing only the schema and a small seed set. And that's usually the most tricky part for an organization that's been around for a long time. But with any organizational change, and this is true big, small, pilot project, if it's a new product, it's much easier to do from the ground up. And I'm not just here talking about things that are difficult to do and say, oh guys, you can do that, it's no big deal. We've actually done all of this at Cover My Meds. And we publish the tools to enable that. One of the big things we do is open source technology and stuff like that. So scriptscribe.org, one of the members of our team, built this application and series of scripts called DB Deployer, which enables database change control using automation tools and maintains a seed data set and seed schema that enables path to production from dev test to production, and a tiny development set. So it's been done, it can be done, and you can even go download tools for free, and we'd really appreciate it if you contribute back, but you don't have to. It's an MIT license, so you can do whatever you want with it. But it's out there, we're doing it right now. So compliance, that's always the thing, and this is a big part of my background. I spent a long time in PCI land, working with Andrew over there actually, and now a fair amount of time in HIPAA land. And I'm familiar with SOC 2 and many of these other frameworks out there that establish control criteria or whatever else. In the case of PCI, it's very prescriptive, right? But it's pretty general. Encrypt things, please. It's not like PCI where it's database level prescriptive. There is a solution for every compliance landscape. There is a control solution for every environment. As a last resort, one of my favorite approaches is to reduce scope and isolate. PCI, I had to use that frequently. But in the case of PCI, credit card authorizations, even for recurring billing, it's much easier to reduce scope and isolate because the technology is doing the billing. And for most business processes, they can be built, so credit cards don't need to be exposed. So PCI is really easy when it comes down to it, because the main data you have to protect is the main data most organizations shouldn't need to expose. HIPAA is a little trickier when it comes to patient identifiers and things like that. It's going to depend on your organization. Are you a health system? Are you a plan? And all the different entities therein. In almost all cases, there's a solution, though. One of my favorite approaches with BYOD, which is this thing we've been talking about for several years now, I don't know why, it's very boring. If you have confidential information in your email, we probably need to take a closer look at that. But if you provide guest network access, isolate mobile devices from your corporate network, have network access control in place, so technical control in addition to the administrative control, you can take that big pile of BYOD controls everybody loves to talk about and throw it out the window. Because really, if you're sending email with stuff that is that big of a risk to your organization, let's spend a lot of time on that and move outside of most of the BYOD controls. And I think that, I really don't want to talk about BYOD, but I think that's an example for something we can all relate to. And there's examples for every scenario in every environment. It's just a matter of finding the best way to do it. We talked about earlier database solutions between BI tools and stuff like that. Those are controls that are reducing scope and restricting access that empower different parts of the organization. On the network side, in PCI land, if we have credit cards way over here in the super restricted network and very few things except the applications can get to it, and database level control database level encryption with strong key management, you have to. It's in PCI. Either that or you have a compensating control, right? And again, there's a solution to everything. Well, most of the other organizations or other parts of the technology platform aren't going to be affected by that. The side story with Etsy, right? They took the reduce scope and isolate to an extreme example because they're an e-commerce organization. They sell stuff on the internet. That's what they do. They isolated their payments environment way far in the corner. And even so far in the organization, they had a dedicated team that was isolated, and probably still is. So every other part of the organization, even in PCI land, could deploy hundreds of times a day and do all the things that make them one of the more competitive technology organizations in the entire world. So whenever we come to compliance, there is always a solution. We just need to step back and explore it and figure out the ways to do it, be it reduce scope and isolate, or do something neat like BI tools and many of the other examples provided earlier. I think this is really fun, honestly. GRC, that's, for many people, a dry topic. Compliance, yay, compliance. Thanks, legislators. But taking GRC in a regulated industry, be it healthcare payments or any of the others, where the average company in the industry is having challenges innovating because of the regulation they're subjected to, being able to innovate with security controls in your information security program in a way that's aligned to the regulation in the industry can make an organization that's way more competitive than 95% of the other companies in that industry. It's going to be a lot more fun to work at, and you'll be able to hire and retain those engineers and people that are driving innovation across all professions. Questions? Tomatoes. Sir.
First, I love GRC. Actually, it's actually one of my favorite topics in security. most of my background has been more on the healthcare side. Now more on the PCI side, so exactly the opposite view. Data governance is actually a big topic around identifying rogue data marks or databases throughout the network. We can put practices and a lot of business processes in place. The identification of something that goes awry is always still one of those competitive areas where putting controls within your borders to identify and to stop business processes can be tricky, because once you see sensitive data crossing your internal network, you normally have a lot of political battles. What have you seen, or what have you been told about being able to perform data governance with perimeter controls that make sure that their sensitive data stays where it should be and not where it doesn't?
I like taking a universal approach. It works better in technology organizations, a multi-tenant SaaS software as a service provider who's providing a service in a single platform, technology platform. So in those cases, you can say, okay, this role, this group of people in operations has a business justification to do this thing universally. And you build the controls around those business process. And assuming that all the personnel management stuff is in place between background checks, etc., and the hiring process is strong enough, and the organization's management isn't being so mean to the employees that they want to be mean back to the organization, I'd say those are pretty strong controls. In the cases where there's an organization that is a little more established and more traditional, there are opportunities to fall back on things that resemble more traditional controls but are enabled with technology, BI tools and things like that, break glass procedures where the technology is still empowering people, but it's building a little extra checkpoints in the process.
So what about places, though? So we know what we know, but if you don't know where the data is, if you're trying to map out in your network, identify sensitive data that's just rogue, either on desktops, laptops, or on a server that shouldn't be where it is. I mean, trying to map out your organization and identify data that you don't know about in certain places. Is there...
Okay, I was thinking in a more general sense. I'll tell you what, there's a ton of vendors that are loving to talk about that subject and sell magical fairy potions. In my experience, it's just hard work. It's doing the exercise, it's going through the organization, a culture of security that takes time, because in the payments organization I was in, we had to do exactly that. It takes time. It can be done. That's probably not more helpful, but I'd be happy to discuss in more detail outside of this forum. Feel free to hit me up. Good question. Thank you. Sir.
So I wanted to add on to that. So what I found is that's actually one of the more counterintuitive things that happen when you accelerate IT is today IT shops are moving so slow that business units do shadow IT. They build these applications and it drives this toxic data onto the desktops. By accelerating IT and doing this very rapid application development, it guts the need for the shadow IT build, and it drives the data back into your server infrastructure and back off the desktops. So, people go, oh, we need to slow IT down, it's too risky, but actually what you want to do is actually accelerate it so you're meeting demand, because when you don't meet demand, people go off and do it on their desktops, and that drives the data in one environment we really don't want to have it. So it's really actually very counterintuitive.
It's a great point, thank you. Very insightful. Sir.
In your continuous integration and continuous release process, how do you insert security into that process, and don't you have to drive security down to the developer desktop? I mean, in that pace of release.
Yes. I touched on it briefly, but I didn't expound very much, and partly it was because I was debating whether or not I wanted to turn half of this presentation into more SDLC, or application security. Some of the things I indirectly referenced, path to production, TinyDB is a fun example. Having a test data set that enables the path to production and consistent schemas all the way up to production enable a lot of the automation. We use CI specifically with that as well. And on the development environment from a system side of things, that is going to differ between the environment, the needs. We have an integration environment because of the types of customers we work with. It makes a lot of sense. Some organizations don't need that. And having automation using configuration management and other systems management lifecycle tools enable that. So ultimately, if that bundle of stuff is built well enough, and really it just takes discipline over time. You don't need this magical big pile of everything, but there's companies that will sell you that right at once. Just building incrementally over time using fast deployment processes enables that very thing. Thank you. I think we probably have time for 2 more questions. There's nobody in the room after me, so we can go a little long, but I wouldn't want to take away from your break between presentations. Yeah.
So at 14 builds a day, how do you go back and decipher which one of the 14 may break something, and if it has a trickle-down effect to other enhancements that are part of each of the incremental builds during a given time period?
Thank you. That's the process side of the automation, which is great. I like that question. We have a tool that I really want to open source, and we will eventually, called Deploy Wizard. And we built automation tools for the process part of it, similar to Worklog, but specific to SDLC. So this tool enables the process part of it, and primarily the communications in the organization, because there's triggers cross-functionally. If operations gets a notice, they understand that they have to communicate with certain customers in certain ways for certain types of changes, be them impacting or not. So we have an audit trail and really a great automation process that's good to work through that's tied to our automation tools from a deployment perspective. We're still building on our deployment tools, and I think I will have a much better story in a year or so. The business process side of things can be automated just as well to be really lightweight. I think that answered your question.
Yeah.
Thank you. One more? Ma'am?
Online access to PHI data, or are you mostly a company that facilitates sort of back office integration?
As far as cover my meds, I'm going to go over it briefly, and feel free to hit me after if you'd like to deep dive. We're a business-to-business company, and we operate very much behind the scenes with a process called prior authorizations. So prior authorizations is essentially a permission slip for insurers to pay for medication. So this process involves pharmacies, physicians, and insurance companies. So it's very much back office, but it's all built on modern technology using web protocols and websites. So depending on the level of integration, depending on the customer, we have different entry points for that process, be it EHR, be it pharmacy dispensing systems, or even if a user, a small health system or a small practice doesn't have those tools, they can just go to our website and work as well. All right, so thanks so much for the questions. Those were really good and actually gave me some ideas for building on this presentation. So if you have any ideas yourself, any recommendations, if I didn't go into enough detail, or if you think that there was something that wasn't quite communicated clearly, please email me. That's my Twitter handle, but my email is warner@awesomemore.com. 2 O's, that's really easy to remember, right? Email me. I'd love your feedback. I built this presentation specifically for you at InfoSec Summit today. I plan to give it again. So your feedback will help me make it better, and I'd really appreciate that. I do a lot in the community, so Cover My Meds, we're hiring. Check us out, covermymeds.com. In the community, ScriptScribe, that's our technology blog at Cover My Meds. We open source all sorts of stuff. If it is not the primary service offering, if it's not our primary product, we are going to open source it. If it's not, well, if it's worth using, but more often than not, we'll open source it even if it's not, and you can make that decision yourself. All our repos are linked on ScriptScribe. We talk about the things we're doing. There's articles about DB Deployer and other things as well, if you'd like to deep dive more on them. I organize Ohio Linux Fest. I'm very involved in LAPSA, the LAPSA Columbus chapter, and this will be our 2nd year for DevOps Days Ohio. If you would like to learn more about these concepts and complementary concepts, check out DevOps Days Ohio. We're only $150. We're going to be probably November this year. Really great speakers. Last year we had a VP from Nordstrom. We had a manager from Yelp. Folks came from all over the country, and a bunch of Columbus locals talked about innovating with technology. And we had some really strong security presentations as well. Dave presented, who is presenting here today. So thanks so much for InfoSec Summit, organizers, speakers, sponsors. I have stickers for ScriptScribe up front here. Help yourself. I'll be out and about. Always happy to chat more. Hit me up. Thanks so much, everyone.